There are massive amounts of evidence for evolution. There are many fields of science that not only support evolution, they confirm evolution in great detail. There's genetics, there's paleontology, there's taxonomy, there's biogeography, there's speciation, genetic drift, species rings, there's embryology.
Okay, wait. If you keep on naming off things that support evolution, we're not going to have any time to start refuting.
Point taken. Hello, I'm Faraday 28.
Rioni 1989.
Chattiest Spike 2.
There's a lack of convincing evidence to back up Darwin's claim that there's a common origin to all life. Of course, there's what we call microevolution. Microevolution just says there's a variation between different kinds of animals.
Strobel clearly shows his lack of understanding between micro and macroevolution.
Microevolution is defined as change below the species level, which means the species have not speciated yet.
But they are still able to reproduce, regardless of those changes.
And that's true. In my neighborhood back in California, we've got lots of different kinds of dogs. And that's a good example of microevolution, variation between a certain kind of animal.
I dare the creationists to define the word kind. I dare them.
200 different varieties of dogs. 200 different varieties of dogs. Variety.
He was very close to saying species, but corrected himself because he realized that if he said that, it would just destroy his whole point, his whole argument.
But in the last 150 years, science has failed to substantiate Darwin's claims of macroevolution.
There are mountains of evidence for evolution. We observe macroevolution today.
Which is that all creatures have a common ancestor, and that natural selection, acting on random variation, can explain how fish became amphibians, which became reptiles, which became birds and mammals, and so forth.
So pretty much the fossil record and genetics has absolutely nothing to do with that, right? Can't even support that in the slightest. Is that what you're saying, really?
Okay, he's technically right on a large scale, but the correct definition of macroevolution is through subsequent macroevolution, a species has changed so much that the new species and the original species are no longer able to reproduce. So therefore you can get two things which look almost exactly the same, but are unable to reproduce. That's macroevolution. Whereas you've got many varieties of dogs and they can all reproduce. That's microevolution.
Instead, the fossil record indisputably shows
Indisputably shows. Indisputable.
That the majority, if not all, of the world's 40 phyla, which is the highest category in the animal kingdom, virtually sprang forth with unique new body plans, fully formed, and without transitionary fossils preceding them.
That is complete and utter shit.
This has got to be the biggest load of bullshit I have ever heard in my entire life.
That was a flat-out lie. Every living creature is a transitional, and evolution does not say creatures sprung fully formed just like that.
That is just, he pulled that out of his ass and he's showing it to you. If you look at the fossil record, you see simple organisms at the bottom of the geologic column, and the higher up you go, you see more complex ones. He's probably referring to the Cambrian explosion, which happened about 400 million years ago, over the course of 3 to 7 million years. Yeah, that's a lot of springing into action, huh?
There's absolutely no evidence of this gradual evolution that Darwin predicted.
No evidence, none. 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 Zilch. They don't have any.
In fact, if you were to condense the history of the world into one 24-hour period, all of these life forms would have sprung forth in a mere 60 seconds.
That was a straw man. The first life forms were not as complicated as life is now.
That's 60 seconds out of 24 hours. That analogy is taken from Jonathan Well, from the Discovery Institute, by the way. His analogy is referring to a 2-minute period, whereas here we refer as 60 seconds. His analogy was referring to the Cambrian explosion. So if 24 hours represents 4 billion years, that means 60 seconds roughly estimates to around 3 million years. Yeah, that's very fast indeed. Just to mention, the earliest forms of man, Homo habilis, appeared around 2.5 million years ago. Since the first early man, we've evolved over 2.5 million years to where we are now. And that would still happen in just 60 seconds.
Friends, the fossil
Friends. No.
record has just failed to substantiate these grandest claims of Darwinism.
No, they have not failed in the slightest. It seems like you are the one failing.
Even if we did not have a single fossil, we still have plenty of evidence to support macroevolution and common descent.
Darwin knew it was a problem, but he predicted 150 years ago, he said, well, future discoveries will bear out my theory. They haven't.
Yes, they have.
They have. It's proven. The fossil record is massive. Have you even looked at the fossil record? And even without the fossil record, mapping the human genome would only bring up this evolutionary theory even more. Modern science would still come to the exact same conclusion. Evolution is a deductive theory. You cannot avoid it.
And after 2 years after he published The Origin of Species, we found Archaeopteryx.
And when you think of Darwinian evolution makes the claim that a bat and a whale have the same common ancestor, would you not think we would have millions of transitionary fossils between those two?
First off, we have millions of fossils anyway. But when it comes to things like that, we don't need fossils. We really don't need fossils for anything. We can just rely on the molecular tree of life, or the DNA, which we can count the gene differences and the genes that are the same between the bat and the whale. You can figure out, you can triangulate back to where they came from using those two things.
Growing into those two kinds of... We don't.
Yes, we do.
Science is not founded.
Yes, they have. And why do you make it seem like science is some kind of person walking around looking for fossils? Hey, look, science found a fossil.
No wonder that 100 scientists...
Ooh, 100 scientists. This sounds good. Go on, I want to know this fact.
from a wide range of disciplines, with doctorates from places like Cambridge, Stanford, Cornell, Yale, Rutgers, Chicago, Princeton, Berkeley, Purdue, Michigan, and Temple, including professors from Yale Graduate School, MIT, Tulane, recently signed what they call a scientific dissent from Darwinism. This is what they declared. They took out a 2-page magazine ad. And
such a thing as great as this would require more than 2 pages. It would probably require a novel's worth.
said, quote, "We are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life."
Oh man, Strobel just broke the 9th commandment big time.
The "we are skeptical" blah blah blah. That is a paper from the Discovery Institute.
Those lists of hundreds of scientists who are skeptical about natural selection and evolution, it's just a flat-out lie. At least 88% of the people on that list are not even biologists. Some of them are computer engineers or lawyers, or there was one that was even a park ranger. Many of the biologists on that list have demanded to have their names removed. And guess what? That was 7 years ago.
In other words, the emperor of evolution has no clothes.
It says they are skeptical of natural selection and evolution, and the evidence should be critically examined. But that doesn't mean they just reject evolution.
It's not an attack on evolution, it's an attack on natural selection. Because Darwin didn't propose evolution, he proposed natural selection.
And I agree. And I agree. And I agree.
I'm really glad you finally see the error of your ways, Strobel.
Well, I agree too. I think all scientific evidence should be examined.
I agree. As Mark said, friends, this is not a faith versus science issue.
Yes, it is.
This is science versus science.
No, it's not.
Science versus science? No! There is no contradicting scientific evidence against evolution. None. Not a single thing. If it was somehow found, even the slightest bit that did contradict it, and it stood peer review, that person would win a Nobel Prize.
And I was forced to conclude that believing in Darwinism would require a leap of faith that I was simply unwilling to make.
Believing in evolution does not take a leap of faith. faith is believing in something with little or no evidence, but evolution has mountains of evidence.